Hi, welcome to True Crime Talk. This is part two of the Hinterkaifeck Murders deep dive. This website is www.hinterkaifeck.net. And I'm going to go over some of the information this website has. This is a good website if you want to take your own deep dive into this case. It has a lot of information, so you can come here and get the information. Right now on the screen is the victims page, and it gives a little more detail about the victims, so I'm going to read over that. The victims in this crime were Victoria Gabriel, and of course her maiden name was Gruber. She's the daughter of Andreas and Cecilia Gruber. She was 35 at the time of her death. She was born in June of 1887, and of course they have her death date as March 31st, 1922. It says most of the stories lead to Victoria, so her introduction will be presented first. Victoria was born on Hinterkaifeck and grew up on the farm with two older half-siblings. So her mother was married before, and then her husband died, and her mother inherited the farm, and then her mother married Andreas Gruber, and her mother and Andreas had her. So Andreas and Cecilia were her biological parents. In 1914, at the age of 27, she married Carl Gabriel, a farmer's son who was 1.5 years younger than her and came from a hamlet just 1.5 kilometers away. 9 months later, their daughter Cecilia Gabriel was born, but by then Carl Gabriel had already fallen in the First World War. In 1919, Victoria had another illegitimate child, Joseph Gruber, who was 2.5 years old at the time of the crime. So it says another illegitimate child. If her first child was, if she was married and had a first child with a first husband, it wouldn't be illegitimate, even though he died. It would just, but maybe that's how they referred to it back then. And because they didn't have DNA tests back then, we can't be 100% sure that Silly, the 7-year-old in this case, was actually the daughter of Victoria's husband, Carl Gabriel. It's possible that she was the daughter of another man, possibly even the daughter of Andreas Gruber, who is technically her grandfather. Cecilia Gruber was 72. She was the wife of Andreas Gruber. She came from Gerlsbach and moved to Hinterkaifeck after her first marriage to Joseph Assam. The couple had 4 children, of whom only Martin Assam and Cecilia Assam survived childhood. After the death of her first husband in 1885, Cecilia Gruber was left alone with her 2 children, and less than a year later married Andreas Gruber, a farmhand who lived on the farm and was 9 years her junior. Victoria Gabriel was her only daughter to survive childhood. So Victoria Gabriel did have siblings from Andreas and her mother, but they didn't make it. She was the only one who made it to childhood. I don't know how many children they had, but from what I've read, apparently their children were abused and didn't make it to adulthood because of being abused or not fed properly and taken care of properly. And I don't know what happened to the 2 adult children from her first marriage that did survive. You know, they had already moved out of the house, but I don't know what they thought about this case and if they were ever suspects in the case. Did her 2 children from her first marriage, Martin or Cecilia Assam, have anything to do with their murders? Was that ever looked into? Okay, so Andreas Gruber was the father. He was 63. He came from Grain-Stettin and worked as a farmhand until he married his widowed employer, Cecilia Assam, in 1886. Andreas Gruber had an incestuous relationship with his daughter, Victoria. Both were convicted in a court case in 1915. Cecilia Gabriel was 7, also called Celia or Silly. Was 7-year-old Silly was also murdered. She attended school in Weidhofen and grew up without a father in Hinterkaifeck. Joseph Gruber was 2.5. He was born September 7th, 1919, and was killed March 31st, 1922. From the moment of his birth, Joseph was the subject of controversy. The reason was publicly expressed doubts about his paternity. His neighbor, widow Lorenz Schlittenbauer, had wanted to marry Victoria Gabriel and began an affair with her in 1918, when the marriage fell through, but he, as the biological father, was required to pay child support. He accused Andreas Gruber of being Joseph's real father. Due to several retractions of his statements, Lorenz Schlittenbauer became unsuitable as a witness, and the subsequent trial ended in an acquittal. Child support payments were settled out of court. So I think that means that Lorenz's testimony couldn't be taken as truth in the he wasn't a good witness. So but I guess he couldn't prove that Andreas was the father, so they just ended the trial and he ended up paying child support. And whether he really thought Andreas was the father or not, I don't know. I mean, we know Andreas and Victoria had a relationship, but obviously so did Lorenz Schlittenbauer. Could he have been the real father but didn't want to be the real father? Or could he have known that it was possible he wasn't the father, that Andreas was the father, or somebody else was the father? So obviously the youngest child in this case, Joseph, might have had a lot to do with why the family ended up murdered, unless it was just by some random robber or person that, didn't care about all that. He was just there to rob them, or he's hiding up in the attic for whatever reason. It would seem like Joseph might have been a reason that the murders took place. Just a lot of drama going on in this family. And Victoria, even though she was 35, she still hadn't had the guts or the resources to go off on her own. Or, why didn't she marry Lorenz? If Lorenz at one time was willing to marry her, why didn't she marry him and move in with him and get away from her father? We don't know those answers, but, a lot of times children of abuse don't have the willpower to get away from the abuser because they've been controlled for so long. I don't know. Let's see. Maria Baumgartner was 45. She was the maid. She arrived in Hinterkaifeck just hours before the crime to begin her shift on April 1st, 1922. So what luck did this lady have? If she had not arrived at that time, she would still be alive. Her life was marked by exclusion and hard work. She was slightly mentally disabled, and a shortened leg caused problems with walking. Her sister testified, "My sister was somewhat mentally disabled, had a short foot, and therefore gaited with a limp. This was probably one of the reasons why she was passed around and was still unemployed for weeks after Candlemas. The position in Hinterkaifeck was ultimately arranged through a hired woman." So apparently Maria was, just desperate for work, and she ended up, unfortunately, being sent to Hinterkaifeck. Again, this is the location of the crime, the Hinterkaifeck farm. This is a Google picture of what the area looks like today. Okay, this is the structure of the farm. It was an L-shaped building. Over here in the gray is the family quarters. Let's see what it says. It says the Hinterkaifeck farm was L-shaped and consisted of an old wing where the residents lived, grayed in the attached photo, and the stable, which was blue. So the stable was right here. The attached farm wing consisted of the barn, threshing floor green, and the engine house brown. So this was where the mechanic came to work on the engine, this area. This was the stable, and this was the barn threshing area. Let's see. Hinterkaifeck as a crime scene. When, in the late afternoon of April 4th, 1922, first the discoverers, then onlookers and investigators examined the crime scene, They were presented with a horrific sight. Bodies were found in 3 places on the farm. When the police arrived at Hinterkaifeck, they found the barn no longer in the same condition as the ones who had previously discovered it. 2 of the 4 bodies lying on top of each other in the barn had been moved. One of the discoverers, Lorenz Schlittenbauer, had first turned over Andreas Gruber's body and then moved little Silly's body a little further away. In his statement on April 5, 1922, he explained why he did this. I turned around and grabbed the foot, put it to the corner, and realized that it was Andreas Gruber. I looked more closely at the area and noticed that there were more people lying on the ground. I then asked the other companions whether these people were dead and moved away, namely Gruber and Cecile Gabriel, emerging from the hay. I laid the latter 1.5 meters further to the left against the machine. I had thought that 2.5-year-old Joseph, 2.5-year-old Joseph Gabriel, my son, might also be there and could perhaps still be saved. After I saw that, they showed no signs of life. Because of the apparent altered position of the bodies, the finders were asked to reconstruct the original situation. These 2 situations are captured in 2 crime scene photographs that have survived to this day. The files say that the victims found there all had severe skull injuries and were lying in pools of blood. So the bodies had been moved by the people who originally found them, and some people thought it was suspicious. They thought like Lorenz Schlittenbauer had moved the bodies to, you know, obfuscate the evidence or to, mess up the evidence. It could just be, out of curiosity when you move bodies, see if anybody's alive or, you know, to see who's all there. Andreas Gruber. According to the lead investigator, he was wearing only a shirt and trousers. One must look at the previously linked crime scene photos to see that shirt and trousers do not necessarily correspond to today's understanding and are more likely to describe sleeping clothes. In another report, the trousers are described as underpants. In addition to significant skull injuries, Andreas Gruber's face was also badly injured, with large open wounds that had exposed his cheekbones. Andreas Gruber's head, and thus his injuries, are not visible in the crime scene photo. As with all the other victims, whether this was intentional or accidental will have to be discussed in a later episode. So, it's wondering why the crime scene photos just show them in a pile of hay, like where the other crime scene photos lost, but apparently they didn't take good crime scene photos of the actual injuries. Could it be that the town just didn't really care that this family was dead? They wanted to get rid of them. They were tired of Andreas Gruber. I mean, not the whole town didn't kill the family, but were they not really concerned that they had been killed? Did they suspect it was Lorenz Schlittenbauer, but didn't really care to investigate them that deeply? Because they liked him and didn't like Andreas? Cecilia Gabriel, the 7-year-old girl, was also found dead in the barn. She was lying against the wall next to the stable door, barefoot and wearing only a blue dotted shirt. Her body, too, was handled and moved by Lorenz Schlittenbauer upon discovery. He lifted the girl and laid her slightly backward against the chipper in the barn. She, too, had suffered severe head injuries as well as a large gaping wound located on the chin and on the throat. The girl was the only victim to survive the immediate attack, likely by several hours. Heinrich Ney, who had taken the minutes at the autopsy for the Newburgh public prosecutor's office, testified 31 years later that, according to the autopsy doctor, little Silly could have been saved had she been found in time. So that's awful to think that she lied there suffering. Hopefully she was unconscious, didn't feel any pain. Cecilia Gruber and Victoria Gabriel. Both women were still wearing their everyday clothes, although Victoria Gabriel was not wearing any shoes. Based on the position of the bodies, investigators assumed that neither the perpetrator nor the person who found them had moved them. So their bodies were on the bottom of the pile, and apparently they had not been moved at all when the investigators got there. And it says the perpetrator didn't move them either, so they're saying that they died where they were murdered, that they hadn't been dragged there, like killed in the house and then put in the barn, or killed in another part of the barn and then piled up there, that that's where they died. So maybe they were actually the two first victims. These two bodies were still in their natural positions. One could immediately see that they were still lying as they had slumped over. One of the two women had strangulation marks on her neck, although it cannot be determined which woman it was. Why is that? They couldn't tell which was which body? In addition, both women had been beaten to death. Like, were they beaten beyond recognition? Cecilie Gruber had received 7 blows to the head, shattering her skull. Victoria Gabriel had a shattered right side of her face. This injury must have been caused by a blunt object. Her skull was also shattered. In addition, 9 star-shaped wounds were found on her head. Star-shaped wounds found on her head. So they knew which body was which, so how come they don't know which one had strangulation marks? I guess it was just lost. The evidence was lost over time. They don't know. They know one of them did, but they can't say which one. And they have no crime scene photos to tell them. What else was there to find in the barn? First of all, a cow was roaming freely in the stable, which at least had a glimpse into the barn. The open stable door had numerous blood spatters. The bodies had been covered with a sawn-off door board and hay. The board is said to be 1.20 meters by 1 meters in size, 1 meter in size. So, the theory that Andreas Gruber murdered the family and then committed suicide himself can be disproven by the fact that his body was covered by this big door board thing and hay. So he didn't kill himself and then cover himself up. Could he have murdered the family and then committed suicide or died accidentally, and then somebody came along and covered him up? I think that's highly unlikely. So I don't believe Andreas is the murderer at this point. Now he was a bad man. He could have murdered the family, but I don't think he did. Like, he had an anger problem and he was very controlling, but I don't think he actually murdered the family. He had been the same way all his adult life apparently. So why would he all of a sudden feel the need to kill the family off at this time? What was going on different at this point in time that he felt the need to kill them all and then off himself? Unless you believe that he murdered the family and then somebody else murdered him because they saw what he had done and they, in defense of the family, they killed him. From the photographer's position, there must have been a chipper in the background left. The visible wooden beam may have belonged to it. The right part of the barn may have had a wooden mezzanine floor. It was only less than a year later that a pocket knife and a bloody iron band were found in the barn itself. So obviously the police work in this case was horrifically awful. They didn't test for fingerprints. They didn't search the barn and house apparently very well. They didn't take good crime scene photos. I know photography wasn't as advanced back then as it is now, but was it just like tradition not to take pictures of faces of victims out of respect for the victims? Was it some kind of a, culture thing? Or did they just not do it because they were bad policemen, bad investigators? Or did the whole town just not happen to care too much about the family? Or, why was the investigation so awful? But also, this was a rural area. This was 1922. It was after World War I, before World War II. There's a lot of stuff going on in Germany and Europe. And sure, there's, a lot of poverty, a lot of, like, it's not like maybe a rich country at the time. They didn't have, the resources and the funds, unlimited funds to do these top-notch investigations. Maybe they weren't trained well. They didn't know what to do. They and they didn't have DNA, so they really didn't worry about stuff. Maybe they didn't worry about fingerprints because they didn't know where the weapons were. The weapons were hidden, and they didn't find the weapons because they're really awful investigators, or they just didn't think to look in the hay or in the floorboards of the attic or whatever. Let's see, stable and stable passage, the perpetrator's route between the crime scenes. To get from the barn where 4 bodies had been found to the living quarters, the perpetrators had to go through the stable. The door leading from the barn to the stable was so narrow that only one person could pass through at a time. It can be seen in the crime scene photos. The path leading straight ahead from there was bordered to the left by a long feeding trough. This must have been opened at least once to lead to the stable area. A loose cow was in this very corridor when the investigators discovered the crime. A pickaxe was found at the end of the feeding trough on which reddish-brown stains were later found, which the lead investigator described as possible traces of blood, although this could not be proven in the laboratory. This too was later ruled out as a murder weapon. Or maybe it wasn't the main murder weapon, but maybe it was used, or maybe it was stained from, being used to kill animals, to slaughter animals on the farm. But maybe it was one of the tools used at first, or who knows. Let's see. The stable itself was divided into several compartments and housed the following animals: 2 oxen, 2 bulls, 4 cows, 3 heifers, 2 heifers, 3 calves, 2 piglets, 25 chickens, and 1 yellow Spitz. The Spitz was the dog. So that's a lot of animals. Maybe the barn and stuff the stable were actually bigger than it looks in the picture. That's a lot of animals packed in there. The dog was known as an extremely vigilant farm dog and was locked in the stable every night where he was found. A severe blow wound above on his right eye was noticeable. The kitchen anteroom. On his way from the barn where he had just killed 4 people, the perpetrator came through the stable into the kitchen anteroom, about which almost nothing is known. Either from there or from the large hallway there must have been a staircase to the attic. There was a front door here that led out to the street and was on the right when coming out of the stable. This door, however, was not functional. Andreas Gruber had built a water pipe from the well to the stable sometime earlier to facilitate a water supply in the stable. This pipe ran along the street side of the house and thus closed off this main front door. From then on, the door from the hallway into the inner courtyard was used as the front door. Otherwise, dirty stable shoes and containers, including tools for work in the stable and kitchen, could be left here. In any case, investigators noticed a few things in the kitchen and noted them in the files. For example, it had a stone pavement in contrast to the barn area, whose floor consisted only of round clay. Investigators noticed a few drops of blood on the kitchen floor, but no footprints. The newspaper that the postman had delivered on Monday, April 3, 1922, was still stuck to the kitchen window. He hadn't encountered anyone that day and noticed from outside that the bassinet, usually in the kitchen with little Joseph, who usually played in it, was missing this time. Later witness statements refer to a pot with the remains of bread, soup, and a bowl of potato peelings, remains of the victim's shared dinner, as investigators assumed. This was also used to narrow down the possible time of the crime. 3 doors led off the kitchen. We've already mentioned the entrance to the stable area. Another door opposite led to the maid's room, where there was a bed and which also served as a storage room. The new maid, Maria Baumgartner, died in this room, but more on that later. The final door on the left led into the hallway, which then led to the bedrooms and also to the courtyard. The maid's chamber. Strictly speaking, it's not entirely clear whether Maria Baumgartner was actually the first victim in the living area. Since she was awake and as an adult posed a greater risk, we'll take this as a working hypothesis for now. A door from the kitchen containing a wall calendar opened into the small room. This room was adjacent to the fireplace, and the crime scene photo shows a disused stove with all sorts of items on it: pots, bowls, some paper, smoked meat, and a small paper bag. whose origin interested the police. On a stove against the east wall of the maid's room lay a small paper bag containing about half a pound of lead shot. This bag is a wage wag bearing the inscription Shipak Rupert Trade D2 number 54 wage for the second dated February 8th, 1920. And I don't know what that means, but maybe we'll find out later. To the right, in the extension of the open door, stood a narrow single bed that hadn't yet been used. The 45-year-old maid, Maria Baumgartner, was found lying on her side on the floor with her head almost under the bed. She was still wearing her heavy walking shoes and her normal clothing. She had apparently been unpacking her borrowed backpack. The perpetrator had placed a duvet over her. Someone had draped pieces of clothing and fabric on the window sill of the double-hung window opposite the door. Was this the perpetrator trying to block the view from outside in case anyone wanted to look in through the window? Was it the owners themselves trying to protect the window from drafts? Was it even Maria who was so careless with her belongings? The latter seems almost impossible, given how few she owned, or the first investigators searching for identification papers. This question cannot be answered based on the files still available. Maria Baumgartner had also been killed, and her head lay in a large pool of blood. The bedroom of Victoria, Gabriel, and her children. There is also a crime scene photo of this crime scene. While searching for his son, Lorenz Schlittenbauer had finally acknowledged paternity after arguments in 1919. More on that soon. He found him, too, beaten to death. The 2.5-year-old was lying in his bassinet where he had obviously been sleeping. The perpetrator must have aimed a blow at the closed roof of the bassinet, inflicting such severe injuries near the right temple that fragments of his brain were scattered. As in the kitchen, there were traces of blood, but no bloody fingerprints. And as at the other two crime scenes in the house, a kind of covering had been created for the body. A red skirt was hung over the stroller. The room led off to the left of the kitchen in the hallway and had two windows overlooking the inner courtyard. The bassinet stood near the entrance at the head of a double bed which was positioned by the window. To the left of the door was another crib, likely Joseph's actual sleeping place. The room itself contained several cupboards and dressers. Investigators were able to recover papers and an empty wallet on the unused double bed. Because no paper money was found except for a single 5-mark note in a prayer book, investigators assumed that the perpetrators had at least gotten hold of the paper money that had been in the wallet. This assumption is not undisputed, as several valuables were found. And during the second search the next day, a well-filled cash box was found in one of the cupboards that had not been searched. The cupboard had been blocked with a grain sack, and the box had been hidden under sheets. Let's see, the living room, bedroom of the Gruber couple. Coming from the kitchen, the door to the Gruber's bedroom led off to the right of the hallway. This room was a corner room and had windows overlooking both the inner courtyard and the herb garden to the west. In the second bedroom, nothing had been rummaged through. This was where the Gruber's double bed stood, where Andreas Gruber had apparently just gone to bed. This room also contained 2 tables and a display cabinet. Nothing relevant to the crime was observed in this room. Investigators also searched the property's attic and made observations whose significance is still widely debated today. A staircase led to the first floor, either from the large hallway or from the small room between the kitchen and the stable. Up there was a room with a new bed drawer and a smokehouse near the fireplace. Smoked meat was also stored there, one of which was freshly sliced. Grain was stored in various compartments, and there was also an area with hay. From there, the residents could transport the hay to the stable area through a small door. The attic was accessible throughout. There was no firewall between the living and utility areas. 2 footprints were found in the hay, as if 2 people had been lying there. The Münchner Zeitung reported, I guess that's a newspaper, reported on April 10, 1922, that hay had been strewn from there to the fireplace above the kitchen, perhaps to muffle footsteps. A rope was attached to a crossbeam, which investigators suspected might have provided an escape route for the perpetrators. In several places, at least near the chimney and above the engine room, roof shingles had been shifted so that they overlooked the inner courtyard. So in several places, at least near the chimney and above the engine room, roof shingles had been shifted so that they overlooked the inner courtyard. So let's say two criminals were up there and they had it arranged so that they could sneak around quietly up there, hopefully without being heard or seen, and also that they wanted to be able to see the courtyard in other areas so that they would know if somebody was coming or what was going on around the home. Only when the farm was demolished in the spring of 1923 was the murder weapon found in the attic. Wow. Okay, so after the farm was sold by the then community of heirs to Joseph Gabriel, the brother-in-law of Victoria Gabriel and uncle of Silly. So Joseph Gabriel was the brother of Victoria's dead husband who died in the First World War, and he was the uncle of Silly. So the community apparently let him buy, all the heirs together let him buy it. So he bought it, and then demolition work began in February 1923. As was customary at the time, as much material as possible was reused. During this work, a root hoe was found in the false attic, second floor, a tool commonly used to remove tree stumps. Based on a highly distinctive screw connection and bloodstains, this root hoe was identified as the murder weapon. So what they're calling a REUT hoe has been called a mattock in other places. I think they're talking about the same thing. See, a pocket knife and a bloody iron band were found next to the root hoe. Another section of this website has the chronological information. I can read over some of this. It says that the selection of events shown below is subjective. There may be things missing, which you are welcome to report to us via the contact form. So detailed chronology is 1849, November 27th, birth of Cecilia Sanhuter, later Gruber. Those are very detailed. So going way back to the births of people. Okay, the birth of Andreas Gruber in 1858, birth of Lorenz Schlittenbauer in 1874, May 14th, 1877, Cecilia marries Joseph Assam of Hinterkaifeck for the first time. Or did she marry him more than once? On April 24th, 1877, Joseph Assam received the Hinterkaifeck estate from his widowed father, Johann Assam. A notarized marriage and inheritance contract was also signed between Cecilia and Joseph Assam. After the marriage, Cecilia Assam became co-owner of the estate. So that's when he died. She got the farm. Joseph Assam, Cecilia Gruber's first husband, dies in 1885. The following children were born to this marriage. A daughter who apparently died, Cecilia Assam, later Staringer, signatory of the acknowledgments. Martin Assam, killed in action on August 19th, 1916. So he died in the war. And Andreas Assam probably died in childhood. So actually, I guess she only had one living child, and that would be Cecilia Assam, her daughter. And her other daughter had died apparently around the time of birth or as a child. Her son Martin grew to an adult, but he died in the First World War. And then Andreas probably died in childhood, it says. So she only had one adult daughter who actually was apparently still living when she was murdered. Okay, the wedding of Cecilia and Andreas Gruber. The following children were born from this marriage. Okay, Victoria Gruber, she survived into adulthood. She was also one of the murder victims. Sophie Gruber, She died young, see, 1889 to 1891, so she didn't live long. An emergency baptized daughter, name unknown, so maybe died in childbirth or as a baby. A possible further marriage of Cecilia Assam Gruber with a Joseph Ostermeyer, which may have only been of short duration, and which, according to Leuschner, third edition, is said to have existed after the death of Joseph Assam, can now be almost ruled out after appropriate research. Okay, so apparently somebody thought at one time that she had been married in between her first husband and Andreas Gruber, but they found that not to be the case. Somebody made a mistake in the records or something. They looked at the records wrong or didn't understand them. Okay, in 1899, Lorenz Schlittenbauer took over his parents' farm in Groburn. This farm was located about 500 meters from Hinterkaifeck. At an unknown date, Lorenz Schlittenbauer became the local guide in Groburn. 1903, according to Lorenz Schlittenbauer, interrogation 1931, 16-year-old Victoria Gruber told his first wife, Victoria Schlittenbauer, so his first wife happened to have the same name as the murder victim, that she was seduced, abused by her father. April 3rd, 1914, Victoria marries Carl Gabriel from Lag, and the isolated farm is deeded to her beforehand. Carl Gabriel allegedly leaves Victoria after a short time and returns to his parents. However, they are said to have sent him back to Hinterkaifeck. Note, unclear source needs to be verified. So apparently maybe he went there to live at the farm. He couldn't stand Victoria's family and got the heck out of there. But then his family sent him back and said, "You're married, son, you got to go back." I don't know if that's true or not, but that's a possibility to this website, according to this website. But then he ended up being killed in the war. Maybe that was a blessing for him if he wanted so badly to get away from the family and the farm. Let's see. 1914, December 12th, Carl Gabriel falls in the First World War in France near Neuville Street, Vast. 1915, births of Cecilia Gabriel, the daughter of Carl and Victoria Gabriel, as far as we know. But if she was still being abused by her dad, this could be the product of that. Or also, Victoria might have had another lover besides her husband, Carl. May 28, 1915. On May 28, 1915, the Nuremberg District Court sentenced the elderly Gruber to 1 year in prison for incest and his daughter Victoria to 1 month. So I guess because she was an adult, she was punished too, even though she was a victim of his from an early age. July 14, 1918, Victoria Schlittenbauer, the first wife of Lorenz Schlittenbauer, dies. I assume from natural causes, as far as we know. If Lorenz was the culprit in this murder of this family, he could very well have killed other people before. But I have not heard anything saying that he would have killed his wife or what she died of. So I assume she died of natural causes. Around this time in 1918, Schlittenbauer had an intimate relationship with Victoria. So not long after his wife died, he starts hooking up with Victoria. Did he off his wife possibly to be with Victoria or something? Or he just, got with Victoria, looking for a new mom for his kids. And according to his statements during interrogation in 1931, he had sexual intercourse with Victoria Gabriel about 5 times, the first time about 2 weeks after his wife's death. Well, people grieve differently, I suppose. According to his account, Victoria Gabriel practically forced herself on him at that time. And it very well could be, that Victoria was a bit promiscuous. It's not uncommon for victims of child sexual abuse to be promiscuous. I see a statement by neighbors Pohl and Siegel, April 5th, 2022. I assume that should be 1922. It confirms that Lorenz Schlittenbauer Victoria wanted to marry, possibly during her pregnancy or after the birth of little Joseph. However, old Gruber strictly refused. So that would give Lorenz Schlittenbauer a reason to be mad at Victoria and her father. He was angry with Andreas Gruber for not allowing him to marry his daughter, but he was also probably angry at Victoria for not agreeing to get away from her father. Maybe this hold that Andreas Gruber had over his daughter Victoria was so strong that she would not leave even to go be with Lorenz at his home to get away from her father. And maybe this angered Lorenz Schlittenbauer. He couldn't convince her to move, and he wanted her and his son to be raised in his house, and he didn't want Andreas Gruber to have anything to do with his wife anymore or his children with her. Okay, September 7th, 1919, birth of little Joseph. Between September 13th, 1919 and September 27th, 1919, Andreas Gruber was imprisoned for incest. So Joseph was born September 7th, and then his grandpa / possible father went to prison for incest in September 13th and didn't get out, or between September 13th and September 27th, went to prison for incest. Schlittenbauer testified against Gruber on September 10th, 1919. At Victoria's urging, he retracted his testimony on September 23rd, 1919, and also claimed paternity. Good grief. So there's a lot of reasons for there to be anger amongst all these people in this family. And Victoria, apparently, maybe she really loved her dad, even though he abused her, and she didn't want anything bad to happen to him. Or maybe she was so in fear of him that she didn't want anything bad to happen to him, because it would come back on her. Or she was just embarrassed for people to know that she had a child by her father, so she wanted Lorenz to claim paternity, even though she knew or thought maybe it wasn't Lorenz's, that it was her dad's. Whether Lorenz Schlittenbauer or the older Gruber was the father of little Joseph remains an open question, because they didn't have DNA back then, so we will never know. Unless, they dig up the bodies and retrieve some kind of DNA and, test descendants, I guess. 1921, March 27th, the maid Crescens Reiger gives birth to a daughter on Hinterkaifeck. Hopefully that was her husband's baby or one of her lover's baby if she wasn't married. Hopefully it had nothing to do with Andreas Gruber. See, May 7th, 1921. Lorenz Schlittenbauer marries his second wife, Anna Dick. So he got married. I guess he knew him and Victoria would never get married. So he married his second wife, Anna Dick, from Die Polshofen, who brings a son, Joseph, born on March 31st, 1913. So Lorenz Schlittenbauer remarries, and so now he has his own kids with his first wife, and plus now he has stepchildren into the marriage. 3 other children she had before this marriage had already died, so just one child was brought into the marriage. The 2 had probably only known each other for 3 weeks, so it appears to have been an arranged marriage. This marriage produced 5 children. So him and his second wife had 5 children, and then I think he had children with his first wife, and then he had a stepson. So that's a lot of kids. Schlittenbauer became debt-free this year and built up a certain amount of wealth. Schlittenbauer's eldest daughter, Magdalena, also marries this year and moves to Tirum. At the end of August, the maid Crescens Reiger resigns. So the maid gets out of Dodge in 1921 at the end of August. In March of 1922, about 2 weeks before the night of the murder, Pastor Haas allegedly found 700 gold marks in an envelope lying in the confessional. The money was supposedly deposited by Victoria Gabriel as a donation to the mission. Note, the incident first appears in a 1948 report written from memory by police officer Xavier Miendres. Its veracity, for example, regarding the proximity to the later murders or the amount of the money, is difficult to assess. Police officer Miendres was only transferred to Hohenwart in 1931 and was not involved in the original investigation. So this information may not be accurate. March 29, 1922, at just a few weeks old, Anna and Lorenz Schlittenbauer's first daughter died, likely of sudden infant death syndrome, and was buried on March 29th. It was, common back then for babies not to make it long, for babies and children not to make it to adulthood. So we can't say exactly why all these kids were dying before they made it to adulthood. But we can say that according to some reports, that Andreas Gruber and his wife Cecilia Gruber's daughter Sophie might have died from abuse or neglect. The church register lists whooping cough as the cause of death. March 30th, 1922, in the morning, Andreas Gruber discovers that the lock on the engine shed has been broken. However, this attached shed provides no access to the stable or barn behind it. So the machine room, even though it had been broken into, apparently there's no way to get to the barn or the stable from that room, so it wasn't too big of a deal to him, that it wouldn't allow somebody access to the rest of the home and the barn. But why did somebody break into that room? If it was somebody who knew the farm well, they would know that it wouldn't access the rest of the building. So, it could very well have been somebody other than, somebody who knew the farm very well. Maybe a farmhand who didn't realize that the machine room didn't open up into the house. Or a total stranger suspect. We can't rule out that it wasn't a total stranger who just, got lucky, hid there, and didn't get found out, and ended up, once he got found out, murdered the family, or one or two people murdered the family. There are also signs of an attempted break-in on the door to the feed room. So somebody broke into the machine room. They broke the lock to the engine shed, and then there are also signs of an attempted break-in on the door to the feed room. On his way into the forest, Gruber encounters Lorenz Sittenbauer at 11 a.m. and tells him about the break-in, or rather the attempted break-in, in a trail in the snow that leads to the farm but not back. Wow. So maybe the person, let's say it's one person, the person was still there on the premises and hadn't left in the snow. They were waiting for the snow to go away and sneak off. Or maybe they were staying hidden there for several days. Shortly thereafter, Gruber encounters farmer Casper Stegmeyer from Groburn and also tells him about it. So Andreas Gruber tells people about these instances, but to my understanding, he didn't go to the police, and it very well could be because of his troubles he's had with the police in the past. He just didn't care about police or care for the police, or he hated police, so he didn't, you know. Let's see it. It is said that shortly before the crime, either Victoria, statement in 1951 by Sophie Fuchs, Cilly's classmate, or her mother, statement in 1984 by Sophie Fuchs, as well as notes in the files, ran away in despair one night. So either Victoria or her mother ran away in despair. I would believe it probably Victoria. Her mother was older. Would she have run away? Or her husband was so awful, maybe she did try to run into the woods. She couldn't take it no more. The woman was found crying at the par. The next morning, Cilly was very tired at school, and when asked by the teacher why, she told them about the incident. During this search, a current edition of the Mutineer Zeitung newspaper was allegedly found, which so unsettled Andreas Gruber that the following day he asked the postman mayor whether anyone in the area received the newspaper. There was no such thing. So apparently, let's say it was Victoria who ran off that night after a fight with her father. When they were searching for her, Andreas found this newspaper, and it was around the house or near the house, so he knew that somebody had to be on the property and leave it there. And he couldn't understand where it came from, so he asked the postman about it. And the postman, he didn't bring it. He didn't know anybody in the area who got that paper. So did somebody come from away from the area to this farm location, was hiding out there, and they committed the murders? Was it a former farmhand who came back to the property, somebody who knew a little bit about it? Or was it just a transient going through the area, needed a place to stay? It was cold and snowy, so he broke in, found him a place to stay, and stayed a few days. And maybe he witnessed and saw things while he was hiding up there in the attic or hayloft. Maybe he was found out, and that's how the murders ended up happening. March 31st, 1922, and he brought that newspaper with him, in other words, that whoever left the newspaper there might have been the murderer, or one of the murderers. March 31st, 1922, on the morning of that day, Andreas Gruber and Victoria Gabriel are said to have gone shopping in Schrobenhausen. So that's Andreas and his daughter Victoria went shopping March 31st, 1922. There, Gruber reported unexplained nighttime noises in the attic and a cow that had been untied or gotten loose during the night. Victoria allegedly reported the same thing at another store. So some really creepy stuff was going on. Now, some people might say that Andreas Gruber made it up, or he told Victoria for whatever reason to tell people this. Like maybe him and Victoria were setting up some plan, but it was really Andreas planning on killing the whole family, but he wanted to set up to make it look like a stranger had done it beforehand. And then somebody else murdered Andreas after they found what he had done to his family. That theory seems a little bit far-fetched to me. I think strange things were really going on at the farm. I don't think Andreas Gruber made these things up. And there are enough witnesses, not just Lorenz Klittenbauer and another farmer, but people in town. Both Andreas and Victoria had spoken of these weird occurrences that had been happening at their farm. So there are unexplained nighttime noises in the attic and a cow that had gotten loose somehow. Let's see a note. Neither the date of these purchases nor the exact circumstances are known, even though it's under March 31st, 1922. Apparently, there are only hearsay statements from Johann Kramer and Wenceslaus Bley from 1930. So this was like 8 years after the murder, so we don't know how accurate these are. At 4:30 p.m., the new maid, Maria Baumgartner, arrives in Hinterkaifeck accompanied by her sister, Franziska Schaefer. After an hour, the sister leaves the farm. Well, thank goodness she got away from the farm. March 31st, 1922, probably between 7:30 and 9 p.m. Friday, an unknown perpetrator used a so-called Rutho, and I know I'm not pronouncing that right, presumably in the barn, to first kill Victoria, then her mother, then her father, and finally her daughter. Sequence assumed, reconstructed. See, their sequence may be way off, but if Victoria and her mother's bodies had not been moved at all, and they were in their original place, and the other bodies were stacked on top of them, then we can assume that they died before Andreas Gruber and Silly Gruber. He then used the same weapon to kill the 44-year-old maid Maria Baumgartner in the maid's room and then little Joseph in Victoria's room. The murder weapon, confirmed by the testimony of former Hinterkaifecker farmhand George Siegel, was owned by the Grubers. April 1st, 1922, Saturday. Little Cecilia is missing from school, so apparently they went to school on Saturdays back then. Coffee salesmen Hans and Edward Srivosky find no one in Hinterkaifeck during a visit, approximately between 12 and 2 p.m. Late in the evening at night, carpenter Michael Plackel passes by the farm property. He is blinded by an unknown person with a flashlight. A fire is burning in the oven. So presumably, if the family has already been murdered, whoever is holding the flashlight, the person who he could not see at night because he's blinded by the flashlight. It says flashlight. It could have been a lantern at that time. A flashlight or So whoever was there would be the murderer or one of the murderers, but apparently this guy didn't know who it was and didn't care to look who it was because nobody knew the family had been murdered or anything, and so he didn't think anything of it. It is uncertain to what extent the animals were cared for and the cows milked before the bodies were discovered. April 2nd, Sunday. Victoria's friends want to pick her up for church but find Hinterkaifeck deserted. This incident first appears in Hecker's Donna Courier series and is otherwise undocumented. The Grubers are missing from the church. A son of Farmer Siegel from Rachelsbach wants to buy lard at the Hinterkaifeck farm but doesn't find anyone there. Let's see. April 3rd, 1922, Monday, 1952, postal worker Joseph Mayer reported. So it wasn't until 1952, so some years later after the murders. I stuck the newspaper to the kitchen window as usual. I only noticed that on this trip I didn't see the stroller in the kitchen as usual. The kitchen door itself was half open. I would also like to point out that I watched the child, who always rocked herself in the stroller, through the kitchen window during my delivery rounds. He said herself, but I think maybe he didn't know that Joseph was a male child, or I'm sure he's talking about Joseph in the stroller, not the 7-year-old. April 4th, 1922, Tuesday, mechanic Albert Hoffner arrived in Hinterkaifeck around 9 a.m. on Tuesday, April 4th, 1922, to repair the cylinder head gasket on the 4 HP diesel engine. Beforehand, he spoke with Mayor Grieger in Ringen for about 30 minutes and informed him that he was on his way to Hinterkaifeck. Since the garden gate, presumably to the front garden, was locked, he went around the house to check on the residents. There he found the back door locked, looked through the kitchen and stable windows, and heard the barking of a dog inside the house and the lowing of cattle. He then waited for about an hour near the front garden under an apple tree, west side, for the Hinterkaifeckers to return. During this time, he whistled through his fingers several times to attract attention. Because he could wait no longer, he gained access to the engine shed on the north side of the building and repaired the engine there for about 4.5 hours. So either it was unlocked or he just broke into it like somebody else had to fix it. He stated that he sang and whistled while he worked and then gave the engine a test run to attract attention. He then locked the engine shed door and walked through the garden into the courtyard. Only then did he notice that the barn door was wide open. He approached within 3 meters of the open door but did not enter the building. Then he walked along the side of the house toward the front door. He found the barking dog tied up in front of the door. The front door was also locked. Note on the dog. The yellow Spitz is described as a good and watchful dog, or a very watchful dog, who was locked in the stable every evening. On April 4th, 1922, witnesses found the dog in the stable, but with an injured eye. He was distraught and aggressive toward anyone who approached him. After the Hinterkaifecker family died, the dog came to Lag because he found a new home there with the father of a man named Jacob Gabriel, Carl Gabriel Sr., according to the Augsburg files. So maybe Carl Gabriel, Victoria's dead husband's father, took custody of the dog, and hopefully he had a happy life after that. Who knows what that dog saw? And he was injured, but was he injured on purpose or accidentally while somebody was murdering the other family members? Did he get hurt? And that was he trying to protect the family or attack the killer, and he got hit in the process, or did the killer purposely just hit him because he wanted to hit him? But was the dog coming at the killer and the killer hit him to get him away? So the dog, ran off in pain or whatever. But he didn't, kill the dog. Obviously, the dog can't speak. The dog can't be a witness to anything, so there's no need to murder the dog as long as the dog wasn't bothering you anymore. And maybe once he hit the dog left him alone, so he didn't need to keep hitting the dog. Hoffner then walked back through the garden to his bicycle, which he had apparently parked on the north side of the building, and left at around 2:30 p.m. via Groburn, where he informed Schlittenbauer's daughters, Victoria and Maria, that the engine had been repaired and that no one was to be found at Hinterkaifeck. Lorenz Schlittenbauer then sent Johann, 16, and Schlittenbauer's stepson, Joseph Dick, 9 years old, Cecilia's schoolmate, the approximately 250 meters to the Hinterkaifeck farm. So Lorenz sent his 16-year-old and 9-year-old son and stepson to the farm to see what was going on. Would he have done that if he knew that they were dead there? Well, probably. If you're a killer, I guess you don't care if your kids come upon dead bodies. They found no one and returned home. So apparently they didn't go in the barn. They didn't notice anything, just like the mechanic, the repairman, didn't go in the barn. They saw the barn door open, the mechanic did, but he didn't go in and they didn't go in. So Hofer, meanwhile, continued on to Kaifeck to see Blasius Lebmeier. On the return trip, Hofer reported the successful repair of the Hinterkaifeck's engine to Mayor Grieger and Wingen. At 5:30 p.m., he set off for home. He reached Pfaffenhofen around 7 p.m. Based on the mechanic's statements, it can be assumed that a person was either already in the yard when he arrived or entered the building from the south side while the mechanic was busy repairing the engine. That's creepy. Accordingly, this person must have led the dog from the stable outside to the front door, tied it up there, and opened the western barn door during the repairs between approximately 10 a.m. and 2:30 p.m. After the mechanic left at approximately 2:30 p.m., the dog was led back into the stable and the barn door was barricaded again from the inside. This is how the three men, Schlittenbauer, Pohl, and Siegel, found the building around 5 p.m. So did the person who was there moving the dog and opening the door and stuff know the mechanic was there working, or did he not know the mechanic had came to work on the thing and he was doing stuff and just got lucky that he was not seen by the mechanic? That is creepy. The mechanic thinks, nobody's there. He doesn't know the family's dead in the barn and in the house. And then somebody's there moving stuff around, but the mechanic doesn't see him. Did the person there see the mechanic, though? Did they just get lucky not be seen, or did they not realize somebody was there? When Lorenz Schlittenbauer's two sons returned from Hinterkaifeck without finding anything after 3:30 p.m., Lorenz Schlittenbauer went to Hinterkaifeck with his Groburn neighbors, Michael Pohl and Jacob Siegel, as well as his sons Johann and Joseph Dick. The men entered the barn. The sons remained outside in the yard. The three entered the building through the open door to the former engine house. No, not to be confused with the attached engine house. Okay, so they're not going in the attached engine house. They're going into that building that's not attached to the other building. The next door to the barn was locked and was forced open. 4 bodies were then discovered in the barn. Lorenz Schlittenbauer continued through the barn alone, while Pohl and Siegel left the barn and walked across the courtyard to the front door. There, Schlittenbauer opened the front door with the house key previously presumed missing and let the others in. If Schlittenbauer had an affair with Victoria and known the family, a long time, it's not unusual to me that he would know where the key was or maybe even had his own key. So I don't think that proves that he must have murdered the family since he had a key. In the bedroom and in the maid's room, they find the other bodies of little Joseph and the strange maid. I don't know why they call her the strange maid. After the bodies are discovered, Pohl and Siegel leave the crime scene with Joseph Dick. So the 2 neighbors leave with the younger son. Schlittenbauer waits in the house for the police to arrive. Mayor Grieger of Wingen is notified and contacts the Hohenwart police. Another Groburn resident is sent to Weidenhofen to call the Strobenhausen police. Onlookers visit the crime scene. 1800 hours. The police from Hohenwart and Mayor Grieger from Wegen arrive. 6:15 p.m. So 1800 hours would be 6 p.m. 6:15 p.m. A telephone message reaches the Munich criminal police. The police from Schrobenhausen arrive in Hinterkaifeck. They cordon off the crime scene. Onlookers can no longer enter and view the murder site at will. 9:30 p.m. The Kripo's journey from Munich to Hinterkaifeck begins. The 6 officers, including 2 dog handlers, arrive in Groburn after midnight and go to the house of Mayor Grieger. 10 p.m. The court commission from Schrobenhausen arrives but does not stay until the arrival of the Criminal Investigation Department from Munich. April 5th, 1922, Wednesday. Early in the morning, Munich criminal police officers arrived at the crime scene. Initial interrogations were conducted there. Schlittenbauer, Paul Siegel, Franziska Schaefer, Maria Baumgartner's sister, Cecilia Staringer, and Bernard Gruber. The 5 crime scene photographs were taken. A possible crime scene sketch has not survived. April 6th and 7th, 1922, Thursday and Friday, on a makeshift table in the courtyard of the Hinterkaifeck estate, Neuburg District Medical Examiner Dr. Johann Baptist Mueller performs autopsies on the 6 victims. On Thursday, Victoria Gabriel, Cecilia Gruber, and Cecilia Gabriel are autopsied, and on Friday, Andreas Gruber, Little Joseph, and Maria Baumgartner are autopsied. A record of this autopsy cannot be found in the surviving files. April 8th, Saturday, 1922, the transfer of the 6 victims in their coffins from Hinterkaifeck to Weidhofen did not take place until the morning of April 8th. The victims were buried in Weidhofen amid great public sympathy. The Strobenhausener Wochenblatt reported on the funeral in its April 11, 1920 issue as follows. After the Judicial Commission had released the bodies of the 6 murdered victims following the dissection, the burial of the 6 victims could take place on Saturday. The number of people who wanted to pay their respects to the victims was incredibly large. Around 3,000 people had come from near and far. It was a shocking sight when the bridge carriage arrived with the 6 coffins, accompanied by the entire school children. After Reverend Haas had performed the blessing at the southern entrance of the cemetery, the unfortunate victims of the crime were laid to rest in a mass grave. The adults on the right and left, and the 2 children in the middle, Reverend Haas described in moving words, using the biblical story of Cain and Abel, how terrible murder is in God's eyes, and how only a person who no longer has a spark of faith in God in their heart can allow themselves to be carried away by such a terrible act. Since one cannot even shy away from the murder of innocent children, shrank back. Immediately after the funeral, the first Holy Mass for the dead took place in the church. It proved too small to accommodate all the mourners. Let's see, on June 7th, 1922, the Schrobenhausen District Court is considering whether the Hinterkaifeck inheritance belongs to the Gruber family or the Gabriel family. One of the heirs, Bernard Gruber, Andreas's brother, has lived and farmed Hinterkaifeck since the crime. The 2 disputing families ultimately agreed out of court that the Gabriel family could purchase the property from the Gruber heirs at special conditions. The Gabriel family's interest appears to have been in the acquired agricultural land rather than the buildings. February-March 1923, Carl Gabriel Sr. and his sons, with the help of neighbors, demolished the property. The well-hidden murder weapons, stained with blood, and a rusty pocket knife are discovered. Also found is a supposedly bloody iron band, which is later not mentioned. Parts of the building are removed for further use. So isn't that crazy how they didn't find what they believed to be the murder weapon until after they were getting ready to demolish the buildings, or they demolished the buildings and it was found? That's crazy that they weren't found. And then that iron band, on the website I read from in the previous video about this case, they suggest that the iron band could have been used to hit Silly, the 7-year-old Celia, in the face. But, they don't know. If it had blood on it and stuff, yeah, it says bloody iron band when they found it. It was used in some way, but, how do they know exactly if that was used on her face or not, and not the others' faces and stuff. I guess, the injuries with the screw hole injuries, they know what that came from. But, the iron band, are they sure? And it says is later not mentioned, so I don't know. It's just mentioned like years later. Somebody, oh yeah, we've also found an iron band in addition to the murder weapon in the pocket knife. I don't know. Parts of the building are removed for further use. 1925, May 4th. The teacher Hans Blogger encountered Lorenz Schlittenbauer at the ruins, who was crouching down the cellar stairs, looking into the cellar. The cellar and foundation walls were still there. I didn't even know it had a cellar. Schlittenbauer reacted with great shock and recounted something previously unknown. Apparently, someone had tried to dig one or two holes near the site where the bodies were found, perhaps to bury the bodies. But just because he thought that or said something like that doesn't mean necessarily that he was the one who was there and murdered the family. Was he there visiting because, he missed Victoria? He missed the family being there, even though they were an awful family. You know, a family being slaughtered is a huge deal. It's, an awful thing. Did he, just going there trying to think what could have happened or who could have done what they did to the family? Or was he going there because he was the one who did it and just wanted to think about it for whatever reason? In 1926, a fire broke out at Schlittenbauer's estate, in which documents related to Hinterkaifeck were also burned. What documents did he have about that estate? He wasn't one of the heirs. Why did he have documents to that? According to a later statement by Schlittenbauer, these documents allegedly included the document in which Victoria Gabriel waived support for her son, Joseph. The fire damage was fully covered by insurance. Well, first off, did he start a fire to get insurance? If he's unethical enough to kill people, he'd be unethical enough to do insurance fraud. But also, I thought that he agreed to pay child support, but apparently they agreed that he wouldn't pay child support, that Victoria Gabriel signed forms agreeing not to pay. Or is that why she was killed? Because she was wanting child support from him, and so he ended up killing her, and then he had to kill the rest of the family so there wouldn't be witnesses. March 30th, 1931. After some suspicions arose against Schlittenbauer, he was interrogated in Munich. The second interrogation revealed some contradictions, but these gave the police no reason to investigate further. So even though he contradicted himself, they chose not to investigate further. On May 22nd, 1941, death of Lorenz Schlittenbauer. So he died in 1941, so he could no longer be at risk of being arrested and tried and convicted for this murder. So if he was the one who did it, which he makes a very good suspect, there's nothing that they could do after 1941. So this is the website www.hinterkaifeck.net if you're interested in finding out more about this case. It's a nice website. There aren't any ads on it, at least not for me. I don't know if in Germany there are. This website is in English and German. Obviously, I'm reading it in English. And they also have a Facebook page that is in German if you are interested, or if you can understand German or you want to take the time to translate it. This is Hinterkaifeck.net's Facebook page if you have Facebook. I don't have Facebook, but they do have a Facebook page, and you can contact them through their website and stuff. And it just has other information if you're really interested in the case and want to learn more about it. Of course, there are many good videos on YouTube about this case, but two videos about this case that I really like are, one is from Wendigoon. He's very popular on YouTube. If you've never heard of him, you might want to look him up, but and you might have heard of him, but you didn't know he had a video on this case. He does. It's called The Unsolved Case That Still Haunts Me. He did. He posted about 3 months ago. So Wendigoon has a video up about this case. And then also, I like the video by Profiling with Pat Brown. She has a video about this case called Profiling the Hinterkaifeck Murders. And she is a professional profiler, so she analyzes the evidence from that standpoint. So you might enjoy her video. And what I like about both of these videos is this one's over an hour and this one's almost 2 hours. They're longer versions of the story, and they get into more details. They're not just telling the short story briefly. So if you want more than just a short story, you want people who analyze evidence or look at multiple theories or whatever, I think you'll enjoy these two videos. I believe Wendigoon's top choice for a suspect was Andreas, I believe, if I remember correctly. And then Profiling with Pat Brown's top choices, I think one was Andreas, but the other was Lorenz Schlittenbauer, because he is, in my eyes too, he's one of the main top suspects. But we don't know. It could be that somebody, one of the other lesser known suspects, like one of the old farmhands, ex-farmhands who did it, or even maybe just a passerby, a stranger in the area traveling through. It is possible, even though people think that it must have been somebody who knew them and knew the area, knew their farmhouse well. It may have just been somebody who's good at hiding in places and not being found, and then searching around and finding stuff in homes that other people think it might be hard to find, like the hiding place where the murder weapon was allegedly hidden and then found once the building was demolished. So anyway, Profiling the Hinterkaifeck Murders, Profiling Pat Brown's, or with Pat Brown's website or YouTube page, and then Wendigoons. Those are two good videos about this case if you're looking for some longer version videos. Of course, there are many videos on YouTube about this case, many, but those are just two that I've seen that I really enjoy.